and even spiritual feelings out there in Port Townsend as well. I feel it every time I'm there.
Well, that's true, and I see Port. It's a place that draws a certain kind of person, and I don't like to have the word go out because people will come here, and we don't need more people raising the real estate prices because I'm a renter and it'll raise my rent. But anyway, it's basically Sedona North, except only those people who live here understand that.
There you go.
There's more. I'll bet there's more shamans, more healers, more psychics. I mean, more of like artists and writers and poets here than I think any other place in the country. And somehow it's the sort of place that either draws you or repels you. And I tell you, if it draws you, it's like you have found your place in the universe.
Oh, it's so beautiful over there. You take where I live in Snohomish County. You take the ferry from Edmonds. You go across the Puget Sound, and oh my goodness, and they head north, and you about go as far as north as you possibly can, at least on this side of Puget Sound, and there you are at Port Townsend. It's just beautiful.
Mm-hmm. And isolated from the hordes over in Seattle. So,
yes.
And just driving up from Vancouver today, it's like, oh my God, how do they deal with this traffic? I mean, every day it's Saturday afternoon, and the traffic is horrendous. How do they deal with it? And we have 3 cars waiting at a stop sign. It's a traffic jam.
That's right. Oh, Betty, you are in the heart of Sasquatch country as well. I mean, let's not forget there's the UFO activity, of course, that's famous for, but the Olympic Peninsula. That's I think if you asked any Bigfooter out there, they would tell you that would probably be one of the, if not the biggest, Sasquatch kind of like sighting areas in the entire world almost.
Well, that's true, and fortunately we have Ron Moorhead, who is one of the world's authorities on Bigfoot, who just lives in Squim, the town next door.
Does he?
So he's somebody I can frequently, in fact, he comes to my Olympic UFO meetings, and I go to his events and whatever. But there's so much wilderness in the Olympic Peninsula that it's absolutely ideal habitat.
Oh, so yeah. I mean, and you can, I mean, I don't know, people from around the world might not know, but you could actually be walking in the Olympic Peninsula rainforest on a hot summer day, and not even seeing the sun or much light at all. It's just so dark and dank, and everything is covered with moss. It's just a fantastic place for Bigfoot to hang out, I would think.
Well, that's true. And I even had somebody report a Bigfoot sighting here in Port Townsend, and I thought, gee. We get cougar reports and bear reports and all sorts of other things. I guess it's not out of the possibility that Bigfoot would wander in as well.
Oh, can you imagine in Port Townsend, that lovely seaside community? That would be awesome. Yeah. Hopefully it wasn't in conjunction with the UFO.
Well, no. As far as I know, it was by itself. But the way the person described it, it sounded like he just nailed the description and the sound, the speed, the movement, everything of what I know about Bigfoot. Yeah. It's hard not to at least become somewhat involved with the Bigfoot phenomenon because there's so much cross-interest with people who are interested in UFOs. And that goes the same thing with crop circles, the paranormal, and many people who have who are experiencers, who have experienced some kind of close encounters. Also, they have they're very telepathic, and they'll have ghost activity in their home. There's just a lot of crossovers, so you have to think that there has to be some connection between all of these different phenomena, and particularly since it appears that Bigfoot could very well be interdimensional, that there's so many reports of them, and as somebody shoots at them and they just disappear in a ball of light. or the reason why there are so many sightings and yet no one ever finds a body. No one ever finds them sleeping. That they must somehow be able to slip out of sight. This is just pure speculation, but there certainly seems to be some kind of a paranormal aspect to it.
Yeah, definitely. It's fascinating, and I would imagine you being on the emergency response team, right, for MUFON. Do you get certain reports about cryptids and Bigfoots, and also things that are not just UFOs?
Not through MUFON. People tend to report, say, cryptids to an organization. God, I can't remember the name of the organization here on the Olympic Peninsula, but there are groups that specifically deal with, say, Bigfoot.
Yeah.
But I get some really strange reports that people give me directly. And then I have a monthly group that I facilitate here in Port Townsend, the Olympic UFO. And I always invite people over to my house afterwards, which is just a few blocks from where we hold the meeting. And I'll take in my living room, you hear the most extraordinary stories because it's a safe space, and everybody there is open to the possibility that these things exist, and they know no one's ever going to get rolled eyes or laughed at or anything else. So I hear the most extraordinary things in my living room.
Oh yeah, I have been in that cozy living room of yours, next to the wood stove. By the way, just blazing away. It's just a great beautiful old house that you live in there. And after your Olympic UFO meetup group meets, which is, by the way, very popular. You're talking 50 to 75 people show up on your monthly meetings. About half of them show up at your house afterwards and talk for hours.
That's right. Sometimes I have to throw them out at like 9:30 at night because it's a very comfortable place for people to, and they always bring food. And it's just, and again, some of the things that I hear are, they're not the sorts of things that really fit the kind of reports that you would make to MUFON. For example, one gentleman who I know outside of the group, but also within the Olympic Peninsula, the Olympic UFO group, was telling the people in my living room, and I'm sitting there listening to this stuff, about, and again, this is somebody who's a very successful businessman. He is a pilot with a private plane at the local airport. He's highly credible. And he was talking about how he had, at that point, this was about a year ago, had shortly before that, been out in the yard, maybe 10, 11 o'clock at night, while the dog did its business. And he's sitting out in his chair out in the yard, and he sees off to his far, to his far left, he sees a light coming from the horizon from his far right, sort of arcing across the sky and disappearing behind the foothills on the far left side of his view. And the next thing he sees is what looks like a laser beam of red light that shoots up from where that object disappeared on the left side, shoots up into the sky, and all of a sudden, the sky opened up into roiling flames.
Oh, my God.
And it filled the whole sky. And then it went sort of and disappeared. Well, he came over to my house, and we got online and looking up on Google Images and other places for anything that looked like what he saw in the sky. And this would have been pretty much just right over Port Townsend. And, he looked at blast furnaces, this, that, and another thing, and a nuclear explosion was the only thing that even came close to what he saw. Whoa. So when I hear Linda Moulton Howe talk about these cosmic wars, you have to wonder if she isn't onto something.
Yeah.
Are there things going on interdimensionally, some really nasty things going on that's like a dimension or a frequency away? Right.
Yeah, that's fascinating stuff. And those are the kinds of things that your group there at the Olympic UFO meetup, they bring to the meeting. It's just happening right now as we speak. It's not just historical sightings, from years ago. But speaking of which, you have just come back from Vancouver, Washington, where you actually gave a talk on historic sightings of UFOs in Washington State. Can you tell me about that?
Well, when I started researching this, it was actually I had no idea there was as much history with UFOs in Washington, and no matter what map you look at, UFO sightings per capita, it doesn't matter. Washington State always comes out as one of those areas with the most sightings. And in fact, this is just sort of like an aside, but I actually came across a chart that had appeared in The Economist, which was, which is this, renowned British economic magazine. It's like the New York Times regarding economic issues. Very, very staid. Well, they had an article in there, and they had these charts. America's UFO sightings from 2000 to 2014 by hours of the day, and they discern that most of the sightings happened during drinking hours. So then they had their researchers do the research to find out what was the sobriety rate in these different states.
Oh,
and
interesting.
It turned out that Washington still, apparently, we may be the most stoned state because marijuana is legal, but it still came out as the most sightings, the most sober state, still with so many sightings.
Oh,
but I thought
man.
It was this is the stuff you couldn't make up. So even The Economist determined that, Washingtonians must be pretty darn sober out there, yet they're still seeing UFOs.
Oh, that's a fascinating poll or study where they come up with the idea of correlating UFO sightings with the drinking population.
Yeah.
At the same
I
time.
think it was meant to dismiss it as ha ha ha. You see,
Right.
The states with the highest drinking rate are the states where they get the most reports, and it turned out to be absolutely untrue. So they had to eat. They put it in, I'm sure, because it was humorous and funny, but it kind of undermined their whole argument about UFOs being reported by people who were inebriated.
Yeah. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I have always thought that, because that's one of the first things that anyone will ask you if you report something anomalous. They'll say, were you drinking that night? Were you on any drugs or medications? Mm-hmm. The first thing that they do, and of course I would imagine it's part of the protocol for MUFON to find out if people are, in an altered state at all when they're,
mm-hmm.
Kind of witnessing these things. Yeah. But you would think that a person that was in an altered state or drunk or anything like that would probably not want to report a UFO. I would imagine that those kind of folks are kind of weeded out almost because of their conditions.
Well, that's right. They, in fact, I would have to say, and from having interviewed, golly, seems like hundreds of people since I first started as a field investigator, almost 6 years ago, 5.5 years ago?
Yeah.
That the people who report to MUFON, because they give their contact information, they know somebody's going to call and talk to them. There are very few that don't come across as very credible. They may be misidentifying Venus or the ISS for a UFO, but they did it in all seriousness.
Right.
So, and then yes, we do always ask them and they don't mind, and they'll invariably say, that they're on this drug or that drug, but it didn't affect what they saw.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, that's. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that those reports that MUFON gets, specifically here in the state of Washington, which is your territory, I find them to be very serious, sober-minded individuals that make these reports because of some of the things that you're telling me that most people, from what I gather, they call up and the first thing that they tell you is, you're going to think I'm crazy. But
generally that is the first words that come out of their mouths, and then I assure